Namaskar. Good morning. It gives me Manasi immense delight. Thank you, especially the Honorable Minister, esteemed dignitaries, distinguished guests, delegates of G20 countries, invited countries, international organizations, regional organizations, knowledge partners, eminent speakers, representatives of print, press, media, and all the invitees who are present here for the opening session of the Third Energy Transitions Working Group ETWG3 meeting that is being held in this Grand Geo World Convention Center in Mumbai, the capital of Maharashtra. Ladies and gentlemen, India's G20 presidency celebrates India's civilizational ethos, drawing inspiration from the Sanskrit saying Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which translates to the world is one family. This resonates strongly in India's G20 theme of one earth, one family, one future. Privileged to have with us today Honorable Shri Rao Saheb Patil Danve, Union Minister of State for Railways and Mines. Welcome, sir. Shri Alok Kumar, Secretary, Ministry of Power, Government of India and ETWG Chair. Welcome to you. Shri Pankaj Jain, Secretary, Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas. Shri Vivek Bhardwaj, Secretary, Ministry of Mines. Shri Bhupinder Singh Bhalla, Secretary, Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, and Shri Amritlal Meena, Secretary, Ministry of Coal. Welcome, everybody. Ladies and gentlemen, in this meeting, G20 countries will explore innovative ways of achieving a global energy transformation, ultimately revitalizing the world's commitment to this crucial transition. At this point, I take the opportunity to mention that the first ETWG meeting was held in Bengaluru in February 2023, second in Gandhinagar in April 2023, and both were highly successful with your overwhelming support. Thank you once again. With those introductory words, I call upon Shri Alok Kumar, Secretary, Ministry of Power, Government of India and ETWG Chair for the welcome address. Sir.
Thank you. Honorable Shri Rao Saheb Patil Danve, Minister of State for Railways, Coal and Mines, Government of India. Namaskar and a very good morning to all the distinguished delegates from G20 member and invited countries, representatives from international organizations, and my colleagues from Government of India. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all this morning to Third Energy Transition Working Group meeting here in the city of Mumbai, the financial capital of India. I extend my sincere gratitude to all representatives for their support and valuable inputs provided to us during first and second meetings held in Bengaluru and Gandhinagar. We had overwhelming participation in these two meetings. As we all know, energy is vital to all economic activity and access to affordable, clean and secure economic growth, and energy is a critical driver of both growth and sustainable development. All the countries around the world are affected by the global energy crisis with supply disruptions and energy price volatility arising from current geopolitical situation combined with resurgence in demand following the pandemic. Above all, we must drive a rapid energy transition around the globe to mitigate the adverse effects of climate change in line with our pledges and commitments in the context of Paris Agreement, as several member countries have highlighted and has recognized the priority areas of presidency of this transition will lead to recognize national circumstances and multiple national pathways, and also simultaneously strive to achieve common objectives of globally resilient and secure energy supplies and goods to ensure just, affordable, inclusive energy transition. As responsible members of the global community, it is our collective responsibility to take bold and decisive actions on energy transition. Friends, we agree that we all need to accelerate our efforts towards mitigation pathways, which combine energy efficiency improvement and electrification, grid modernization, and low carbon power generation. Beyond that, we need to take advancing efforts towards adoption of affordable clean technologies such as carbon capture, utilization and storage, clean and green hydrogen and its derivatives, biofuels, small and modular nuclear reactors, etc., that will likely require technology cooperation and collaboration for investment and low-cost financing. Furthermore, as affordable access to power and clean energy solutions becomes increasingly important, so is securing supply chains of critical materials, ensuring long-term supplies, and navigate the clean energy transition in a more sustainable manner. Distinguished delegates, we all are fully committed to accelerate our march towards a cleaner energy future. As far as India is concerned, our updated NDCs are bold, decisive, and a significant break from the past. As we know, collectively we achieved significant consensus over the first two working group meetings on our priority areas. There were also very valuable insights, comments, and suggested improvements proposed by distinguished delegations, which we have sincerely tried to address in the draft communique as well as the draft of the high-level deliverables. Before we dive into the details for the next 3 days in this historic and vibrant city of Mumbai, I would urge all members to collectively reflect on the importance and historicity of the mandate that the citizens of our planet have bestowed on us. We are expected to be bold, decisive, and practical in advancing our collective commitments under the Paris Agreement and under all previous presidencies through collaborative, consensual, and multilateral actions. I urge all the distinguished delegations to embark on our deliberations in the spirit of collaboration and alignment, so that we are able to also provide the private sector and financial community with adequate and trustworthy signals on investments and financing that will drive the transition during a sustainable future for all. We are all moving towards a connected energy future where we are all in it together with a common purpose and each with a clear role. This shall help us to create our new energy world. Once again, I welcome you all to the third Energy Transition Working Group meeting and hope that we will have constructive discussions for the next 3 days and we will come out with a very productive outcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you, respected Secretary, sir, for the initial remarks. We will now have opening remarks by Troika, beginning with Ms. Life de Souza Garcia, Head of the Renewable Energy Division, Brazil. Ma'am.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, Chair. I thank the government of India for welcoming us one more time in this beautiful country. Dear colleagues, It's good to see you all again. We compliment the Indian leadership on the work they have been doing so far and appreciate the flexibility and openness with which these negotiations have been carried out. Brazil continues to support India's effort to negotiate a solid and comprehensive communique in which we reaffirm the G20 countries' commitments to energy transitions. It's our responsibility to build upon the agreements we reached in Bali. We need to send a clear message to the world. The largest producers and consumers of energy are committed to pursuing a just and inclusive energy transition that will contribute to achieving our collective net zero goals. Brazil looks up to India's presidency and hopes to be able to do as good of a job next year. We plan to build upon India's priority issues and approach energy transitions also from the developing countries' perspective. We hope that hosting both the Clean Energy Ministerial and Mission Innovation back-to-back with the G20 Energy Ministerial will contribute to the debate about the need to scale up the development and deployment of clean energy around the world. And we hope that these negotiations are constructive. We are looking forward to discussing all these issues and deliverables during these 3 days in Mumbai. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. I will now request Mr. Yudo Dwinanda Priyadi, Senior Advisor to the Minister on Strategic Planning, Indonesia, for his opening remarks.
Thank you. Excellencies, our G20 Troika, all chairman of G20 India Presidency and delegation from Brazil, Excellency Mr. Sri Rosahid Patil Dante, Minister of State, very open to you. All delegates from G20 members and invited countries from IOS, good morning, greetings to you all. First of all, my highest compliment to G20 India Presidency for organizing the third meeting of ETWG in Mumbai with all excellent hospitality and interesting side event. I also appreciate the Presidency for circulating the updated version of Ministerial Communique Zero Draft and the draft of high-level deliverables from the ETWG 6 priority issues. As a Troika this year, I want to remind us all that we are the family of the Premier Economic Forum. We are seen as the family of achievement. Last year, it was a highly turbulent year. However, as a family, we can still achieve optimum result. We have agreed Bali Leaders Declaration with its Bali Compact and Bali Energy Transitions Roadmap. This year is still challenging. Our economy is not fully recovered from the global pandemic. We are still facing present impact of economic crisis, geopolitical conflicts, and rising poverty. However, this year, India Presidency is toiling to develop last year's result in ambitious ways. Now, as G20 family, what do we have as common ground and challenges? First, our forum has a great task to focus on energy, particularly on energy transition and energy security. As we have seen, at least in the last 5 years, we have become the barometer of global energy agenda. We must maintain this success and determination. Second, as all eyes always see us, G20 has an important role in driving global agenda. Now we are passing the time concern. We only have 2 months remaining to ETWG4 and the ministerial meeting in Goa. Now we must focus on the consensus outcomes. Focusing on the communique, we have to ensure inclusivity. We also must provide a clear relation between communique and the high-level deliverables. Third, we need to ensure continuity. This is important for us to move forward smooth and silky from presidency to presidency. We are facing critical issues, energy security, access, and transition with concern on inclusivity and affordability. We need to elaborate from them based on national circumstances, national priorities, and realistic targets. This necessity should be inside in our outcome documents. In the end, I do hope this meeting can help us get consensus in the committee and its related documents. I wish us all the best and keep our fingers crossed throughout the session. Thank you. Back to you, sir.
Thank you, sir. I now invite Honorable Shri Rao Sahib Patel, Union Minister of State for Railways and Coal and Mines, for the special address. Sir.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Namaste. I am glad to welcome all delegates and representatives from member countries and guest countries to Mumbai, India's financial center. Thank you for participating in this meeting. I hope you enjoy the city's culture, heritage, art, and cuisine. Dear friends, under strong leadership of respected PM Narendra Modi ji, India is strongly committed towards Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the theme of our presidency, which implies that we are committed to working towards healing our one world, creating harmony within our one family and giving hope for our one future with focus on building agreement and promoting collaboration among G20 member nations to address urgent issues like energy security and global warming. We must give preference to the development and adoption of sustainable energy sources and policies that promote conservation and reduce carbon emissions. We are pleased with the fruitful discussions and deliberations at the Energy Transition Working Group held in Bengaluru and Gandhinagar, with an aim to identify collective actions to promote equitable, shared, and inclusive growth in this meeting. We as members of the G20 have a responsibility to lead the charge in transitioning to cleaner energy and reducing our carbon footprint by investing in renewable energy sources like wind, solar, and hydropower. We will not only reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, but also create new jobs and boost economic growth. We all have set our national determined contribution to advance energy transition. India has already achieved its commitment on non-fossil fuel capacity addition, and the updated NDC marks an important step towards achieve India's long-term goal of reaching net zero emission by 2070. To reach a net zero future, 90% of the world's electricity in 2050 must come from renewables. We will have to work together to accelerate the transition to clean energy and to promote sustainable growth. Developing nations may face problems like limited access to technology, inefficient financing, and inadequate infrastructure. To ensure a successful and equitable transition, it is necessary that we should provide support and resources to the country. We must give preference to research and development of new and innovative clean energy technologies to make them more cost effective and safe. Advancement in clean energy technology can create the way for a more sustainable future for generations to come. G20 nations must collaborate and work together in the transition to clean energy so that we can share best practices, cooperate on research and development, and to provide financial and technical assistance to developing nations in order to fight against negative effects of climate change and to ensure energy security. It is essential that we must shift from fossil fuel to renewable energy. In that condition, India's leadership is significant in transition to low carbon economy. The government can play an important role in setting policies and regulations. The financial institution can also play an important role in providing funding and investment opportunities. Corporations can adopt sustainable practices and invest in renewable energy sources. The multilateral organization can provide technical and financial assistance to developing nations. And lastly, citizens can also become a part of the movement by adopting energy efficient practices in their daily lives. India's life are introduced by our Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji has gathered strong support from participating countries. The current consumption pattern is unsustainable, reducing natural resources and causing environmental damage. By adopting judicious utilization of resources and sustainable practices, we can reduce waste and protect the environment for future generations. The G20 nations hold a unique responsibility to lead the way towards a sustainable future. Today, India is emerging as a global leader, and world keeps an eye on our for huge guides, all because of dynamic leadership of respected PM Narendra Modi. Friends, I am optimistic about the 20 discussions and its potential to increase cooperation among member countries, which will help us to achieve our shared goals of a prosperous and sustainable future for all. Thank you all. Jai Hind.
Good morning, distinguished speakers and panelists, ladies and gentlemen who are joining us here in person as well as virtually. I am Karanpreet Kaur from the International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA, and I welcome you all to the G20 Energy Transition Working Group side event on low-cost finance for new and emerging energy technologies, organized by the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, the Indian Renewable Energy Development Agency, IREDA, and the International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA. The event today will focus on the estimation of cost-effective financing for energy transition based on the future trajectory of emerging critical technologies, mainly hydrogen, offshore wind, energy storage, and carbon capture utilization and storage. The technical sessions will delve deeper into the needs, drivers, challenges, and opportunities for investment in critical emerging technologies and the policy framework required for the transformation. May I request the dignitaries for the inaugural session to please come up on the dais. Secretary Mr. Bhupinder Singh Bhalla, Ms. Abha Shukla, Mr. Sunil Nair, Mr. Pradeep Kumar Das. Storage. Secretary Mr. Alok Kumar will be joining us shortly. May I call upon Mr. Pradeep Kumar Das, Chairman and Managing Director, IREDA, to kindly deliver the welcome address.
Honorable Secretary Minari, Principal Secretary Energy, and CGM RBI on the dais, and the dignitaries, policymakers, developers, academia, friends from media, ladies and gentlemen. It is a huge honor and privilege for me to welcome you all to one of the most important, critical, and crucial program today. All along, we have been having the program on energy transition, energy development, decarbonization. We'll be going a little bit of deeper down. The main and major challenging issue of cost part and especially the emerging technology space, how we'll be handling that. Once again, very good morning and very green good morning to you all. While all of us stand at an urgent, unavoidable, and most significant need of the hour on transition to sustainable energy for a cleaner, greener planet, there is a need to think beyond the conventional transition approaches, process, and procedures to achieve the stringent yet truly established NDC target set up by Government of India and policymakers of world. One of the most significant challenges include availability of affordable, sustainable, and reliable financing options based on a win-win approach for the entire economic value chain. Today here we have some of the brightest minds like policymakers, financiers, regulators, and experts, apart from the developers. I'm sure that together we can identify challenges, explore new approaches, and form innovative financial mechanism to unlock the full potential of new and emerging technologies. Myself, Pradeep Kumar Das, serving Government of India as Chairman and Managing Director of Indian Renewable Energy Development Agency Limited, which is the mother organization for RE financing in India. And I'm proud to share here that IREDA is the largest lender in RE financing space of those organizations who are exclusively financing green finance. Couple of days back, we got an input from our knowledge partner BCG. Perhaps we are the largest in world because who others are financing, along with other finance, they do green finance. We do only green finance. So IREDA is there since 36 years, serving the country for supporting and developing clean energy, which has not only become a concern for India, it is rather a concern for entire globe. We need to have an environment where we can live, breathe, and survive. The climate concern, which has gone to such an extreme level, if we will not address that issue effectively, probably our grandchildren will not be having a place to breathe even. Normally, this is a human tendency. We generate legacy of wealth. Time has come, we have to generate the wealth of green energy in any form. Recently, we conducted literacy on energy as part of series of programs of 36 years of existence of IREDA. Many things came to our knowledge, which we feel that we need to share that at school levels. Small example I'll give you, how these firecrackers in the festivities or other time has been reduced, in particularly in NCR. The children are instrumental in that. And similar time has come, we should adopt that kind of approach in order to make not only energy development, energy transition, decarbonization, energy usage effectively. I want to express my appreciation to each one of you for being here. Your presence is a testament to your commitment to a sustainable future and your understanding of the significance of low-cost financing for new and emerging technologies. Why we are talking of finance? If you look at the established RE technology, during construction period, the finance cost is not that significant. Construction period is pretty smaller in comparison to conventional energy. But post-commissioning, and post-commissioning 1 year or couple of years of operations, then finance cost becomes the significant part. So therefore, we need to sit, discuss, deliberate, and share each other's concern and come out for a win-win solution to address these challenges. Let us seize this opportunity to learn, collaborate, and drive meaningful change. Together, we can shape a future where renewable energy is not only sustainable, but also economically viable for all. Thank you, and once again, I welcome you all to this program. And I'm sure with your active participation, we are going to be quite successful at the end of the day. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Das. May I now request the dignitaries to please grace the occasion by the lighting of the ceremonial lamp. I now invite Mr. Sunil Nair, Chief General Manager, Reserve Bank of India, to kindly deliver the address.
Mr. Alok Kumar, Energy Transitions Working Group Chair and Secretary, Ministry of Power, Government of India. Mr. Bhupinder Singh Bhalla, Secretary, Ministry of MNRE, Government of India. Ms. Abha Shukla, Principal Secretary, Energy, Government of Maharashtra. Mr. Pradeep Kumar Das, CMD, IREDA. Senior officials from Government of India, dignitaries and participants in this conference, a very good morning to all of you. It's a privilege for me to address the participants of this side event on low-cost finance for new and emerging energy technologies being organized by the G20 Energy Transition Working Group under the SHEPA track during its third meeting at Mumbai. Low-cost financing for energy transition is one of the priority areas of the ETWG. Therefore, ensuring timely, adequate, and low-cost finance is essential to support the country's push towards renewable sector and efforts to mitigate climate change. The deliberations on cost-effective financing required for the global energy transition in today's side event and follow-up action thereafter would help to further strengthen India's leadership role in the global energy transition. India is among the countries most vulnerable to climate change due to its geography and dependence on agriculture. India has more than 7,500 square kilometers of coastline, which is at a high risk for impact of climate change related to sea level rise. In recent years, there has been an increase in severity and frequency of extreme weather events in India, particularly tropical storms and cyclones in eastern India. The impact of climate change and global warming have shown up early this year. Heat waves in India have been making headlines this year, with the third week of April being particularly severe, with the resultant impacts in terms of loss in livelihood capacity, food grain yield, etc. A recent report from UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change warns that every increment of global warming will intensify multiple and concurrent hazards. It adds that deep, rapid, and sustained reductions in greenhouse gas emissions would lead to a discernible slowdown in global warming with around 2 decades, and also to discernible changes in atmospheric composition within a few years. Issues such as climate change can only be solved by acting together, and the transition to renewable and clean energy is a key to tackle this global challenge. In today's interconnected world, global cooperation in clean energy transition is essential and central to the agenda of sustainable economic development. It is therefore heartening to note that ETWG has brought G20 member countries together in countering the challenges posed by global warming and climate change. The Government of India has been taking a number of measures over the years to promote renewable energy in the country, and as a result, India now stands fourth globally in renewable energy installed capacity, fourth in wind power capacity, and fourth in solar power capacity. Now, I would like to touch a little bit on, since I'm coming from Reserve Bank of India, a little bit on the Reserve Bank of India part. As regards climate action, being a full-service central bank with financial stability as part of its mandate, Reserve Bank recognizes that climate change can translate into climate-related financial risk for regulated entities, which can have a broader financial stability implications. In view of this, Reserve Bank of India has set up a sustainable finance group within Department of Regulation since May 2021, which looks at the regulatory initiatives that need to be taken in area of climate risk and sustainable finance. Reserve Bank is also a part of various international standard-setting bodies like Basel Committee on Banking Supervision, Financial Stability Board, Network of Greening Financial System, and so on and so forth. In recent times, based on the strategy on global best practices on mitigating adverse impacts of climate change, we came out with a discussion paper on climate risk and sustainable finance, which was placed on the RBI website on July 27, 2022. Based on the feedback and the public comments which we have received, as we are already aware, in the credit policy, which was announced by our governor on February 8, 2023, three major announcements were made. Number one, coming out with the broad framework on acceptance of green deposits, disclosure framework for climate-related financial risk. Number three, guidance note on climate scenario analysis and stress testing. These guidelines will be issued in a phased manner. The financial sector can play a pivotal role in this regard by mobilizing resources and allocating them for green activities or projects. Green finance is also progressively gaining traction in India. Deposits constitute a major source for mobilizing funds by the regulated entities, and it is seen that some of the REs are already offering green deposits for financing green activities and projects. Therefore, to support a green finance ecosystem in the country, on April 11, 2023, the RBI came out with a framework for acceptance of green deposits by the REs. The framework will be effective from June 1st, 2023. Over the years, we have also been taking various policy measures to promote and support green finance initiatives through these routes. For example, renewable energy projects have been included as a part of priority sector lending. Bank loans up to 30 crore for renewable energy projects have been brought under priority sector lending. Taking a cue from such measures and in keeping with the financing opportunities provided by the renewable energy sector, in recent years, leading banks in India have been stepping up their exposure to this sector. Today, on the back of lending by banks and financial institutions and overseas investments in the form of foreign direct investment, the share of renewable energy in our energy mix has increased to about 43% of our energy mix. In August 2022, India updated its NDCs and submitted the same to UNFCCC. Among others, we have committed by 2030, the non-fossil fuel-based energy sources would comprise 50% of our power installed capacity, and to reduce emission intensity of our GDP by 45% by 2030 from 2005 level. Also, by the year 2070, India aims to achieve the net zero emission. Achieving net zero goals would require global coordination and access to skills, technology, and global financing. As regards India, the scale of finance needed to meet the above commitments is significant. The Council on Energy, Environment and Water had estimated that a cumulative investment of USD 10.1 trillion is needed to meet our net zero commitments by 2070. Of this, 8.4 trillion investment is needed to meet the power sector transformation shift to renewable energy alone. Industry will require USD 1.5 trillion. Mobility sector is estimated to need USD 198 billion. India will also require financing to scale up the energy storage facilities to bridge the gap between timing of renewable energy power generation and actual power consumption. Each country would have a different energy transition pathway depending on its energy base and potential. The scale of financing needed for the same would also vary accordingly. Raising the ambitions of multilateral financial institutions would help in this regard. The Asian Development Bank has recently unveiled a new facility to speed up climate financing called Innovative Finance Facility for Climate in Asia and Pacific. Scaling up green and sustainable finance and raising resources through new products as renewable energy, InvITs, etc. would be essential. Over the past 3 years, sustainability-linked bonds and sustainability-linked loans market has been growing fast globally in the sustainable finance market. India, too, has seen the introduction of sustainable finance instruments such as sustainability-linked loans. Liberalized ECB norms have also enabled Indian companies to raise offshore finance through green bonds, social bonds, sustainable bonds, and sustainability-linked bonds. In line with the global trends, the issuance of sustainable debt has risen sharply in India during calendar year 2021, taking it to the second place among emerging economies in cumulative green bond issuance. Mechanisms such as blended finance and risk-sharing facilities are also being utilized to finance climate and sustainability-linked projects. I am sure the participants would also be looking forward to the report on low-cost financing for energy transition prepared by the International Renewable Energy Agency in collaboration with Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, Government of India, under India's G20 presidency, which will be released at today's event and is expected to discuss various financing options and the way forward. The RBI also recently successfully issued a sovereign green bonds, which is expected to give fillip to the green and sustainable finance ecosystem in the country. It also released a report on currency finance 2022-23 with a theme towards a cleaner, greener India, which provides thought leadership on this topic. I would like to touch a little bit on the various other G20 groups. Low-cost financing for energy transition being one of the priority areas of EWG has some similarities with the G20 Sustainable Finance Working Group under the G20 Finance Track. That is, mobilization of timely and adequate resources for climate finance and enabling finance for SDGs, respectively. This shows the importance of coordinating actions with the G20 SFWG. Likewise, the G20 Framework Working Group focuses on global macroeconomic issues and deliberates on how policy cooperation can be enhanced to achieve strong, sustainable, balanced, and inclusive growth. Its agenda has climate change and transition policies among the other topics. Likewise, previous discussions have aimed to develop a collective understanding on the challenges facing countries during the climate transition and initiate a discussion on the macroeconomics around climate policy and transition pathways. The G20 Environmental and Climate Sustainability Working Group is working on priority areas of arresting land degradation, accelerating ecosystem restoration and enriching biodiversity, promoting sustainable and climate resilient blue economy, and encouraging resource efficiency and circular economy. As can be seen from above, there is a lot of similarity among the work being carried out by ETWG, SFWG, FFWG, and ECSWG. These underscores the importance of coordinating the actions of ETWG with SFWG, FWG, and ECSWG. It's well known that low-cost finance for new and emerging energy technologies would be a key as India and the rest of the world transitions to a low-carbon future. The financial sector in India has a key role in supporting the above energy transition. Banks and financial institutions would have to play their part in greening the financial sector and supporting the transition to a low-carbon economy as their corporate clients adopt more sustainable and environmental friendly strategies. As a central bank, will play a key role in shaping the response of financial sector through appropriate guidance and regulations. I conclude now. Thank you for listening patiently.
Thank you, Mr. Nair. May I now call upon Ms. Abha Shukla, Principal Secretary, Energy, Government of Maharashtra, to kindly present the special address.
Respected dignitaries on the dais and dear guests. At the outset, on behalf of Government of Maharashtra, I extend a very warm welcome to all of you in the city of Mumbai. Today, we have gathered here to deliberate on the important issues related to energy security, accessibility, affordability, energy efficiency, renewable energy, innovations, technology, and financing under Energy Transition Working Group. As all of us know, that the electricity sector is undergoing several changes. Key among them is the emergence of new technologies of green hydrogen, offshore wind power, and energy storage systems. All these emerging energy technologies are driven by low and long-term fixed prices and lower socio-environmental impact. Simultaneously, coal-based capacity addition is under scrutiny due to its environmental impact and diminishing generation cost competitiveness. Increasing industrialization and urbanization is resulting in increasing demand for electricity. A significant portion of global emissions is linked to energy production and usage. This makes it even more important to make a shift towards emerging technologies of renewable energy sources to replace conventional energy sources. India's deep commitment to aspirational climate change goals has been widely acknowledged by the international community. India has the fastest growing renewable capacity in the world, and today, India is the most attractive investment destination in renewable energy. Our country announced 5 national goals in COP26, which relate to energy transition. Firstly, Our nation has set a goal to achieve net zero emissions by 2070. Secondly, we are targeting to achieve a reduction in emission intensity by 45% compared with 2005 levels by the end of this decade. As of now, around 58% of our energy needs are met through fossil fuels. By the year 2030, 50% of our power generation capacity will come from non-fossil fuels. That translates into installation of around 500 gigawatt of non-fossil fuel-based capacity. And most importantly, we are striving to reduce carbon dioxide emission by almost 1 billion tons over a period of 7 years. India's energy sector is experiencing a transition with increasing penetration of renewable energy in the energy mix. One of the major challenges in the process of such transition is to secure the necessary finance to achieve these targets. And these are limited. Mobilizing private sector investment is the primary solution. However, financing of emerging technologies in renewable energy sector in India, and I'm sure in many other developing countries, is facing multiple challenges. These challenges are largely entrenched with the nature of current financial market in general, such as short tenure of loans, high capital cost, and lack of adequate debt financing, etc. Then there are sector-specific issues relating to renewable energy sector. While 2/3 of conventional power generation capacity is with the direct ownership of central or state government, the responsibility of developing the renewable energy and other emerging technologies such as green hydrogen, offshore wind power, energy storage systems primarily rests with the private sector. The challenge for the sector is then to mobilize private capital at a pace and rate in tune with the policy targets and goals. The available public financing is limited and primarily used as support funding to incentivize private capital to flow into this sector. One of the major concerns for the sector revolves around mobilizing the required finances. More specifically, mobilizing cheap and adequate finance to achieve the ambitious target in view of our commitments towards climate change issues. Collectively, we need to develop a clear understanding of the structure and pattern of renewable energy financing and identify the key challenges that act as barrier to mobilize the necessary finance for the sector. The financing pattern of emerging technologies in RE sector is very much aligned with the debt equity type of financing, where 70% funds are sourced from debt and 30% are mobilized as equity funding. The debt cost of renewable energy projects is very high in the developing countries. The equity funding is mostly provided by third parties, such as private equity investors. This is time when we try to promote variety of investors which range from commercial banks to private equity investors, institutional investors to development banks. We need to achieve size and scale to encourage the banking institutions to come forward. We also need to create mechanism to cover the associated risks to instill confidence of the investors. Since beginning, various incentives have been provided for accelerated growth of new technologies. In view of our national goal, we have been striving consistently to develop the sector with a set of strategic policy and regulatory measures. Several policy initiatives are framed from time to time, both by federal as well as provincial governments, to expand the deployment of emerging technologies in renewable energy sector. To mention few of them, our policy level initiatives such as Jawaharlal Nehru Solar Mission, Initiative for 24/7 power availability across the country by 2019, the National Green Hydrogen Mission are few of them. These are clear reflections of the thrust laid on deployment of energy-efficient renewable technologies. Our global climate commitment of sourcing 50% of our energy from renewable sources by 2030 is a clear indication of policy-level priorities. Presently, the focus of public financing of emerging technologies are of three important types. Accelerated depreciation, which primarily covers tax-based incentives. Apart from that, generation-based incentive schemes and viability gap funding methods are also deployed. In addition, there exists a gamut of policy instruments such as RPO, REC, and feed-in tariff to drive this emerging sector forward. However, when we envisage a paradigm shift in the whole scenario, funding mechanisms such as clean energy funds, concept of green banks and green bonds, infrastructure debt funds, and crowdfunding needs to be promoted along with institutional and policy level supporting mechanisms. India has already taken several strides in this direction under the dynamic leadership of Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi. In January 23, National Green Hydrogen Mission was launched with a goal to install production capacity of 5 million metric tons of green hydrogen by 2030. I am happy to share that the Maharashtra government is also in the process of finalizing its green hydrogen policy, which contains a number of tax-based incentives for promotion of this emerging technology. Similarly, Maharashtra has recently launched a new initiative of agriculture feeder solarization under Mission 2025. The initiative is based on the concept of distributed RE generation at the 11 and 33 kV feeder level. Our objective is to generate minimum 7 gigawatt of solar power to provide daytime power supply to agriculture sector by the end of financial year 2025. Minimum 30% agriculture feeders of Maharashtra state shall be solarized at the distribution network level to minimize the losses and maximize the benefits of daytime green energy supply to agriculture pumps. All such initiatives require encouraging response from private investors. I'm sure that during the discussion in the Energy Transition Working Group, we shall be able to identify innovative solutions for low-cost financing of new and emerging energy technologies. We shall also be able to identify the necessary policy and regulatory interventions to support our ambitious journey towards a sustainable, greener future. I wish all the best to all the participants of this event and wish them success in their deliberations. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Shukla. May I now invite Mr. Bhupinder Singh Bhalla, Secretary, Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, to kindly deliver the inaugural address.
Good morning, everyone. Ms. Abha Shukla, Principal Secretary Energy, Government of Maharashtra. Mr. Sunil Nair, Chief General Manager, RBI. Mr. Das, CMD, IREDA. All the distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, I extend a warm welcome to everyone joining us in person and virtually at this side event of the G20 Energy Transitions Working Group, organized in collaboration with IREDA and the Irena, the International Renewable Energy Agency, on this important theme of finance for the development and deployment of new and emerging energy technologies. This side event is important to highlight the needs to ensure finance for all technologies at all levels of adoption and implementation. This will create necessary momentum for accelerating the energy transition. I would like to thank both Irena and Irena for their excellent support and close partnership in organizing this event. I think having it in Mumbai and where else, I mean, what is a better place in India than the financial capital to have this event? I'm very happy that both, the state government, which implements, which oversees the implementation of new and emerging technologies, as well as the financial regulator of India, apart from, of course, the Indian financing arm, Indian government's financing arm, which is the largest financer of renewable energy in India. Everyone is there on stage today. The energy transition is a technically feasible and economically viable option, and it benefits significantly, and its benefits significantly outweigh its costs. India, through the presidency of the G20, is demonstrating its commitment to an accelerated, responsible, and just energy transition through international collaboration and cooperation. This high-level dialogue on low-cost financing for energy transition focuses on the financing needs for the development and deployment of new and emerging clean energy technologies of hydrogen, offshore wind, storage, and the CCUS. Most of the emerging technologies require extensive research and development, creation of demand markets, reliability of the regulatory landscape, and long-term commitments to attract investments on a sustainable basis. New and emerging technologies would accelerate the energy transition and provide the world with means to achieve global net zero goals at a faster pace and with a much broader scope. The new and emerging technologies, along with the established ones, will provide all countries with a wider range of technologies to choose from as per domestic requirements. Though facilitation of low-cost finance would be pivotal for their adoption and scale-up. The current pace of investment and financing is not sufficient to meet the climate and socio-economic development goals of most countries and their commitments under the Paris Agreement. The G20 needs to explore different avenues of finance, especially from international channels, to accelerate RE deployment. We need to strengthen policy commitments as policy and regulatory stability, transparency, and predictability are fundamental to attracting investment and driving cost reductions in the future. Financing, especially low-cost financing, needs to be scaled up significantly with the strategic use of public finance to catalyze private investments. And we need to support innovation in technologies, policy, business models, and market design. In fact, shortly we will release the technical report on the low-cost finance for energy transition, which would capture and show you, to us, what is the scale and extent to which the challenges before us. This dialogue on low-cost finance for new and emerging energy technologies brings together policymakers, technology developers, financial institutions, development partners, and other key stakeholders to deliberate on the cost-effective financing required for energy transition. I welcome on stage, of course, Mr. Alok Kumar, Secretary, Ministry of Power. As you know, the negotiations have started on the communique, and we requested him to join him. Actually, just at the right time. I think he's come, and I welcome him on stage. I hope we gain more insights from today's discussion with the experts into the way forward toward an achievable, sustainable, and just energy transition. Thank you, and look forward to a meaningful and engaging dialogue today.
Thank you, Mr. Bhalla. May I now invite Mr. Alok Kumar, the ETWG Chair and Secretary, Ministry of Power, to kindly deliver the keynote address.
Good morning, all our colleagues on the dais, distinguished participants. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to this third Energy Transition Working Group meeting in Mumbai, Maharashtra, and specifically to this side event on this very relevant topic of low-cost financing for new and emerging energy technologies. I would like to express my sincere appreciation to Ministry of New and Renewable Energy and to the partners, the Indian Renewable Energy Development Agency and International Renewable Energy Agency for organizing this side event. India's presidency is now, and our priorities are before you. We have been discussing it. Now, this is the third meeting. So, our presidency, while is building up on the work of the distinguished work of the past presidencies, it brings in the new perspective of the and needs and requirements and ambitions of Global South. So the whole world is looking at our priorities with a lot of curiosity and see to what extent we will take it forward. If you see the priorities which India's presidency has put forward before the G20 community, there are two aspects which stand out. First is the need of the universal energy access to clean energy, and the global commitment to see that while we accelerate our efforts for energy transitions, we also see that nobody is left behind, and there is emphasis on ensuring the universal access to clean energy, and those are our important priorities. But at the same time, we are also very conscious that while we take everybody along, we prepare ourselves in time so that the technologies are available for the greater challenges we are going to face in terms of deep decarbonization and in terms of need to address the hard to abate sectors. So the presently available technologies, like in most of the countries, will take us to by the end of this decade, but we need new technologies to meet our net zero commitments, our national pledges, and the Paris Agreement goals of containing it within 2 degrees C and strive to do it, if possible, within 1.5 degrees C temperature rise. And India's presidency, therefore, has proposed few promising technologies like carbon capture and utilization and storage, the alternative chemistries for storage, higher efficiency for electrolyzers, fuel cells, and taking forward the SMRs in the atomic energy based generation. An associated priority is to sit together and find out what we require in terms of financing, because as you know from our experience, initial support is very critical to scale up any new technology. Let me give you this example of what has happened in India. We were working in around year 2008 and 2009 on the 20 gigawatt of solar energy mission Now we are talking of 500 gigawatt of this. This 20 gigawatt was appearing to be Herculean task. We have Madam Gauri Singh here, and we were in the team. The cost of the photovoltaic based solar energy was something like rupees 70 to 18 Indian rupees 18 per unit, and solar thermal was around 13 rupees per unit. So we were struggling how to push it. So a lot of public financing went into to buy those costlier energy. And if you see the Gujarat was the leader that they scaled up. And the lending community also came along. And today we have the result of the sharp reduction in the cost of solar-based PV energy from that 18 rupees to now around 2 rupees per unit. This is one example I want to give. The initial support, whenever you have a new technology which has a promise, it can't be really adopted widely unless until we all work together to scale up. And scaling up requires a lot of funding in terms of VGF and other supports, other public support, and also lending, a priority lending. So several countries have their own framework for identifying new technologies for priority lending. For example, India is formulating a scheme for supporting emerging energy efficiency but expensive technologies. And we are going to give an interest subvention. That is one scheme on the table. So this priority is very important, and the work which has been led by MNRE in this priority is very significant. We also have one question that this is the work which the green finance track should do, why energy is getting into. So our response has been that we know our need the best. So we are not saying that how much finance from where and in what manner will be mobilized and will be provided. This group, energy transitions working group, is working on identifying the priorities and some estimates the needs of our financing needs, and present it to the leadership of G20, that if you want to succeed in fighting climate change, of which energy transition is the most important part, this is the requirement of the low-cost finance for promoting these technologies. So India's presidency is well thought. Our priorities are well thought out. The technologies and also the low-cost financing required. I'm very sure the study report which we are going to release will give us a lot of actionable recommendations, a lot of insights, and various possible models, what all interventions are required. Let me share this in today's presentation. One of the things was the de-risking, the presentation by IEA that showed that the cost of finance varies significantly in developing countries. And like India, we know the cost of finance varies even from state to state, the perception, the investor's perception about the risk. So whenever there is a bidding taken by the national organization like Solar Energy Corporation of India, the tariff you recover is around 20 paisa less than if you do the bidding at a state level like I was doing in Uttar Pradesh. So there are definitely, to some extent, we can go on the basis of the de-risking of the projects. We need proper regulatory framework, proper payment security, and also a robust framework to see that the contracts are honored and implemented in the true spirit. Then the investor will come and the cost of finance will be less. But that will not only suffice. That will not fully suffice. De-risking will take us to some extent. We actually need sizable public finance to bring down the cost of financing for the clean energy projects in developing countries, and that is where the most action will be required. We are also conscious, and I think all of us have agreed, developing countries have their ambitions to grow. So in the business as usual, their emissions will grow. if you want to achieve the global goal of containing the temperature rise, so the community, the global community, the leaders, the developed countries have to support developing countries. Otherwise, we will not be able to achieve the global goal of climate change, what we have set for ourselves in the Paris Agreement. So we have to work collectively and see that whatever was promised by the developed countries for supporting the developing countries in terms of the technology and finance, it materializes. We have to work together to see that what could be the interventions and what could be the modalities to see that these funds flow. India, as a leader and as a presidency, current presidency G20, we have been able to sort out our financing requirements to a large extent. So the expansion we have seen in renewable energy in India is being successfully financed, and even from the foreign investors, but that is not the case in many of the other developing countries. So as a G20 community, we have to see that many countries which are still just started moving ahead on the path of development. There is adequate fund flows to those countries, and the cost of finance is also kept low so that the fruits of development are available to those communities, and nobody is left behind. That is all I wanted to say this morning, and I once again congratulate MNRE and Irena for organizing this side event, and we look forward to your recommendations, because we have just started the process of our communique negotiation. Whatever the actionable recommendation from this report which we are going to launch, India as a presidency will be thrilled and happy to incorporate to the extent possible those recommendations in our communique. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kumar. May we now invite the esteemed guests to kindly unveil the G20 technical report on low-cost finance for energy transition, prepared by the International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA, in collaboration with the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy under G20's India presidency. May I invite Deputy Director General Ms. Gauri Singh and Director Ms. Roland Rouge to please come up on the stage for the unveiling of the report. A huge round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. May I request the dignitaries to kindly unveil the next two reports prepared by the Ministry of Power in collaboration with IIM Ahmedabad and NTPC Netra. The reports are titled Financing Needs for New Age Critical Technologies, Carbon Capture, Utilization and Storage, and Battery Energy Storage. Do we have anybody from NTPC Netra here, please? All right. A huge round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. May I now invite CMD Irena, Mr. Pradeep Kumar Das, to felicitate our guests by presenting a memento as a token of our appreciation. With this, we end the inaugural session. Thank you. We now move on to the next part of this event. May I invite Dr. Roland Roche, Director, Irena Innovation and Technology Center, to kindly deliver the scene-setting presentation on low-cost finance for energy transition.
Thank you very much. Dear G20 delegates, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for the opportunity here on behalf of Irena to contribute to the G20 Energy Transition Working Meeting today. I would like to present the low-cost finance for energy transition report. Okay. Maybe yes. The renewable energy investments are still focused on a few technology, but it has been in 2022 kind of a very good year because 80% of the capacity expansion in 2022 was renewable. And continued acceleration in renewable power generation capacity additions must go beyond solar PV and onshore wind deployment. Offshore wind will need to scale up at speed and scale. Those technologies such as green hydrogen, energy storage, and heat pumps are also critical to coupling different sectors and keep the grid operation stable and reliable. Innovation is one of the main levers available to reduce technology costs, accelerate market penetration, and unlock required financial resources. For critical technologies, effective innovation frameworks are vital to scale up the deployment and bring down the costs of these critical technologies, which is inevitably important for the energy transition. Coordinated policies and actions to drive systemic innovations in enabling technology, business models, market design, and system operations to address the key challenges facing a specific technology in its scale-up. The overall share of renewable energy in the energy mix will need to rise substantially to meet the 1.5 degrees target. 150 trillion of investments will be required, with rising estimate from 132 in Irena's veto from 2022 to 150 trillion in its 2023 analysis. Additional investments are needed to strengthen the infrastructure requirements for the ramp up of renewable energies in the energy transition. Per annum, $5.6 trillion investments are needed up until 2050 to secure the Paris Agreement's targets. This is roughly $1.7 trillion more than in the current planned energy scenario. In a time of tightening financial conditions, it is even more essential to ensure the available low-cost finance for the energy transition, particularly for critical technologies. A significant portion of the investment requirements will need to meet by private sector capital, including commercial, domestic, and international sources. Partnerships between public, private, and also philanthropic sectors will be crucial to incentivize the active engagement of the private sector. Multilateral development banks, and just to mention a few here, like the World Bank Group, the Asian Development Bank, will have a unique role to play in creating blended financing structures. Yet existing low-cost financing instruments and case studies within G20 countries and from G20 countries can illustrate the support of well-designed public sector schemes in reducing private sector investment risks. You will find those interesting cases from G20 countries in the report. The costs of capital for renewable energy projects vary depending on factors such as financing structures, technologies, and market conditions, as well as country risk premiums. The three most important drivers behind the cost of capital are the country risk premium, the off-take risk, and also the technology risks. Other factors are also important, including the size of the domestic financial markets and its depth, developer experience, transmission access, and cost allocation rules, and others can be mentioned, as you can find in the report. Future work is definitely needed to better understand the drivers of the differences between markets and technologies, to inform policymakers on potential courses of action to unlock greater access of low-cost financing. To achieve the 1.5-degree climate goal under the Paris Agreement, the overall share of renewable energy in the primary energy mix will need to rise as high as 3/4. The majority of the funds required for the energy transition will have to come from the private sector. The lessons learned from the success of solar photovoltaic and onshore wind can be used to accelerate the scale-up of hydrogen, offshore wind, and also battery storage, critical technologies for the next stage of the energy transition. Enabling innovative frameworks that reduce the transaction costs of technology transfers and facilitates foreign direct investments have played a key role in accelerating the deployment of new and critical low-carbon technologies in emerging markets. The public sector is a critical catalyst in engaging and attracting the private sector investors and project developers under conditions that ensure the strongly required low cost of capital. Innovation is vital if governments are to scale up new and critical energy transition technologies. Along with economies of scale as markets grow, innovation is one of the main levers available to reduce technology costs, accelerate the market penetration, and unlock the required financial resources for the global energy transition. Mapping and understanding the drivers behind financing costs and conditions are crucial to gaining insights regarding differences by technology and country. Thank you very much. That ends my presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Roland Rose. We now move on to the first technical session, the panel discussion on the outlook of new and emerging energy technologies. This session will provide an overview of the technology trends, the transformation required for pushing forward these emerging technologies, and how the R&D and innovation in these sectors will change the financing needs in the coming years. May I request the moderator and the panelists for session 1 to please come up on the dais. Professor Prakash Chandra Ghosh, Dr. Juzair Wasi, Mr. Desikan Sundarajan, Mr. Prabodh Acharya, Mr. Aditya Gupta, Mr. Thomas Christensen, and Dr. Ajay Mathur. The discussion will be moderated by Ms. Gauri Singh. I now hand over to the moderator.
Good morning, and I would like to welcome this very distinguished set of panelists that we have here, and of course the audience. I know that there are many competing events, so thank you so much for being here. What you will really hear from this panel, which is a very interesting lineup that we have here of academia and research. We have the private sector, and we have very strong international experience that will come through experts who have not just the domain knowledge, but also years of experience. So let me take a couple of minutes to introduce my panelists. I have Professor Ghosh and Dr. Wazi, who are both from our premier institute, IIT Mumbai. We have a very strong showing from the private sector with Mr. Acharya, Mr. Sundarajan, and Mr. Aditya Gupta, who represents the steel sector, the offshore wind, and also the new and emerging technologies coming from the Reliance Group. And last but not the least, I have Dr. Ajay Mathur and Mr. Thomas Christensen, who are both well-known figures in the international world of climate change deliberations and also collaboration. So thank you so much for being here and for joining me here. Today's panel discussion has a great segue from what we heard in the inaugural session. And I hope the insights that our panelists will provide us will really set the stage for the next panel, which is about how do we bring the kind of investments that are needed, which were also part of the report that just got released. So maybe I can start with you, Professor Ghosh. Professor Ghosh, who is from the Department of Energy Science and Engineering, to give us a peek view or an insight into what are the kind of emerging technology advancements that we hope to see as the countries move towards increasing their pace of deployment of renewables and on their pathway of energy transition.
Thank you, ma'am. First of all, I'd like to thank for having me here. I'm honored to be here. I'm very young, of course. It's a learning process for me. Of course, the topic I'm going to talk about, I'm not young at all because I'm working in the field of hydrogen for the last 25 years. Started in Germany, started with green hydrogen system with my PhD work. I did cost analysis of that exactly. That's the topic of this particular event. And that particular green hydrogen plant was running from 92 till 2002. And that time I finished my PhD, and outcome of PhD was that time it was not cost effective. So that was an outcome of my PhD. But after that, there was another outcome, what I told, that with time, it will be coming down, the cost, and time will come when we'll be having a cost effectiveness, and probably now time has come. So keeping that in mind, when you are talking about renewable energy, one of the major drawback of renewable energies is that intermittent in nature. And storage is obvious option that we have to take for this particular technology if you are thinking of. And I remember that with my other colleague, most of you might be knowing, his name was Chetan, we were sharing the office. So I used to tell him that even if we give solar energy free of cost, still people are not going to take because energy is so expensive for storing. So keeping that in mind, so if we take different storage options, so whether conventionally lead acid, lithium and batteries, they are mostly very expensive when you are talking about the PV or renewable costs have come down to 2 rupees per kilowatt hour per unit. So there are other options which has up now, it is upcoming, and that's what also we are working is that flow batteries. And it is believed that probably for stationary applications, flow battery is one of them is going to be cost effective. And we can reduce the cost. Now, when you are talking about the cost, there are two different costs always you talk about. One is the capex, but always you forget that the lifetime also is included there. So until unless we are doing the life cycle costing, we cannot actually make any comment that which one is actually expensive. So this particular technology, redox flow battery, what is coming up, it has an advantage because it's having much higher lifetime, even for conventionally what is available at this point of time, vanadium redox flow battery, that is considered that it is having almost infinite lifetime. And probably we can discuss afterwards how we can tell it's having infinite lifetime. So that is one. And other one is that what you think about is that the green hydrogen, which can be also as another medium for storage, and it's having actually multiple applications. And in the beginning, when you are talking about green hydrogen, people think that probably industrial green hydrogen, that will be the industrial hydrogen application. That is the first step where we can step in. And always it is being discussed that at present, at least if we talk about in Indian context, we have around 8 million ton of hydrogen that is being used in the industrial scale. And if we can replace that, probably that could be the first step. But when we talk about 8 million ton of hydrogen, probably we do not understand how much of solar PV. It is 300 gigawatt peak of solar if I talk about. And earlier in the inaugural session, it was discussed, even 20 gigawatt was actually a nightmare. That's what we used to think. I have to think that 300 gigawatt peak only for green hydrogen for industrial scale. Then if we extend it further, because the renewable has an opportunity that nobody will be left out because solar reaches to everybody, whether it's a poor or whether it's a rich, everybody gets the solar radiation. So this is the only means that nobody will be left out if we have actual solar storage technology proper. So the next one, what I believe is that the LPG in our country, that can be actually replaced with green hydrogen as a cooking fuel. And that requirement, if I convert it, is 19 million ton of hydrogen per year. And which comes, if we talk about in terms of the PV installation, it's another 9 gigawatt peak of solar PV. But beauty of this that it is not of one particular system of 1 megawatt. It probably in few kilowatt system. That's what we need. So that's the second, and third one is the transport sector. Now, if you take the transport sector, there also green hydrogen can be also as a carrier of hydrogen, a carrier of energy from renewable. And if we take that number, if we put, there are two different ways of taking even green hydrogen in transport sector, whether we are going through IC engine, that's a conventional, other one using the fuel cell. If we talk about fuel cell, today's date, for Indian industry, we need around 9 million ton of hydrogen. But if we put it in IC engine, we need probably 23 million ton of hydrogen. So now, as I told earlier, so you can also convert how much gigawatt peak of solar we need altogether. So it is probably sometimes when you are talking about these numbers, probably it's very easy to say, but probably it's very tough challenge in front of us to achieve. So with this, I would like to thank you.
Thank you so much. I think, the numbers and the opportunity are extremely clear from what Professor Ghosh just said. even if you're looking at what the National Hydrogen Mission has planned, which is about 5 million tons of green hydrogen by 2030, and if you look at it in the context of what is currently being produced, which is 8 million tons, as Professor Ghosh just said, just converting it means that you need so much more solar PV peak energy to come into our grids. And that actually brings me to Dr. Vazi, who's Professor Emeritus in IIT Mumbai. He has been working on the reliability of solar modules, but his interest also pans into nanocrystal solar cells and nanoelectronics. So very happy to have you here, Professor. And I hope you can share with the audience some insights on where do you think the advancements in the solar PV technology is going, because that's going to be a very critical technology for whatever pathways we think, whether it's coming from the green hydrogen or only getting into the very ambitious targets that India has set for itself. So, Professor, maybe you can give us some insights.
Yes, sure. Thank you, ma'am. And again, it's a great pleasure for me to be here. As the word emeritus in my title implies, I'm no longer as young as my colleague here. But I would like to say that in the renewable area, I am quite new. I've really been working in the renewable energy solar PV area only for the last about 12, 13 years. So having said that, yes, ma'am, you're quite right that, solar energy, we know has been around for quite some time. In fact, has been around for decades, but really came into the fore maybe about 10 years ago. And as Secretary Power mentioned in the morning, really when we were looking at those numbers, 17, 18 rupees per unit in the initial years, it was really difficult to imagine that we could go even up to 20 gigawatts. But of course, that has changed significantly. And now solar energy, solar photovoltaics in particular, is kind of accepted as as a good energy source, and in fact, probably one of the least expensive energy sources. As the Secretary mentioned in the morning, down to almost 2 rupees or 2.5 rupees per unit. One might feel that it is actually now a mature technology and we should start looking at some of the other newer emerging technologies. And that's quite true. We must look at the newer emerging technologies. But what I would like to say, ma'am, is that solar energy itself is undergoing a lot of changes. A lot of dramatic changes are taking place, and we should capture those because solar energy is already there, it's doing well, and every improvement you can make is going to make the transition to clean energy even better and easier. I'll just mention a couple of them initially, although many things are happening. One of them is really the drive to achieve higher efficiencies of solar cells. This has great implications in terms of the eventual cost, in terms of the area which you will require to convert solar energy into electricity. And in the last few years, there has been tremendous work going on all over the world in looking at tandems, that is, combining two types of cells together in one structure. And these tandem solar cells, usually using silicon also, which is of course the mainstream technology today, but using silicon plus another material and trying to get to higher and higher efficiencies. So one of the most common of these, of course, is the silicon perovskite tandem. Perovskite, a relatively new material, an old but new material, old in the sense it was discovered a century ago, but really put into use for solar energy only about 6, 7, 8 years ago. But still it should come of age already. And these perovskite on silicon tandems are now showing efficiencies albeit on a very small area of 30 to 33%, with hopes of going to 38% or more perhaps. So these are really dramatic numbers, and the kinds of changes we have seen only in the last few years, going from 20 something percent up to, as I said, 33%, really gives us the hope that we will actually achieve extremely high solar cells for commercial, eventually for commercial applications. These are not in commercial use yet, but hope to get there soon. The other point I'll quickly mention, which ma'am, you referred to, is the reliability, and this is something Irena has also been concerned about, the quality infrastructure aspect of the things which are going up, and this is something we should certainly look at. I'll just briefly mention here that today the solar panels out there in the field are supposed to have a 25-year lifetime, but that is also something not really a given, because it depends on the initial quality, and this is something we must ensure. But the other thing is, this 25 years, people are trying to push it to 35 years and perhaps eventually to 50 years. This is important because obviously it will reduce the overall cost per unit of solar energy, and really eventually improve the financial models which really will go into solar energy. So these are two of the areas where I think there's a lot of R&D going on, and we must really try and strengthen that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wazi, because I think when in the last decade, the maximum that you were looking for efficiency, if it was in the range of 20 to 22%, it was considered very good. And now you're talking about efficiency that might go up to 38%, which is really makes solar into a technology that can really power the energy transition in a very impactful way. So moving from what we've heard from our two very reputed and renowned academicians who are working in the field of R&D, let me go into our panelists who represent the private sector, because essentially they are the ones who are going to bring in the capital and the technologies on the ground to power the energy transition that we are hoping to see. So let me first turn to Mr. Acharya, who's from the JSW, and he's the Chief Sustainability Officer there. He brings a lot of experience on the forward thinking that JSW has on green steel. So my question to you is, Mr. Acharya, that we've seen some very good news coming out of Europe on the large pilots and small commercial plants that are moving in the process of low carbon steel, especially in the electric arc processes. But with JSW, which has plans to become one of the largest steel makers in India, the blast furnace process actually involves a lot of process changes and a lot of investment. So, what are your thoughts on how the Indian steel manufacturing sector is looking at making these investments? Because you definitely don't want to be locked into long-term assets that are not environment friendly. So, some insights from you.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for that question. First of all, I always find very unfair to compare blast furnace with electric arc furnace. Just for clarifications that we are talking about steel making, so blast furnace is iron making. So in iron and steel, there are distinctively two processes. And the iron making process is the process where a lot of emission happened. And possibly we should compare how the iron making facilities over the globe is changing and how Indian steel industry is trying to change, and what possibly the plan for JSW. I will love to say that. But if you talk about electric arc furnace, that's about making the steel, which is, the technology is available. It is being implemented in India also. We have a lot of electric arc furnaces happening. Now in the steel making, if you see in India, we are contributing almost 2% of GDP and 10% of emissions. You are right that we are growing, and plan is to double the capacity by 2030 and triple the capacity by 2050. So therefore, we cannot double the emission and triple the emissions the way we are growing, and that's the challenge. What's happening in Indian steel industry, if you see, the majority, more than 50% of the steel is being made from the so-called secondary sources, which they don't even use the blast furnaces. The blast furnaces, the big blast furnaces where the iron is made, is used by the large players like JSW or Tata or SAIL. So those are called ISPs, or integrated steel plants. Globally, if you see the transition, why I'm comparing globally and India, and globally, if you see, steel industry is contributing to 0.7% of GDP and 7% of emissions. So in India, we are contributing more in GDP and more in emissions. The transition, what you see happening globally, what the examples you see in Europe, is huge, eliminating the iron making process, which is the emission intensity. That means they have a lot of scrap to remelt in the electric arc furnace. In India, we have a unique challenge because we are a growing economy where we need more steel. At the same time, we don't have a lot of scrap to melt. So at the same time, we have a lot of low quality of iron ore availability. So therefore, the natural process, because our steel consumption is less than 80 kg, whereas global average 3 times more, around 225 kg per capita. So we have a lot of opportunity grow in consumption of steel. So challenge is that how we can decouple the economic growth, decouple the steel industry growth with the emission growth. The natural transition will happen when we have efficiency improvement. And I believe putting up the Indian steel industry, the big players, including JSW, what we are doing, we are putting up large-scale blast furnaces. That means it is focusing on increasing efficiency, making more out of less. So that is where initially, if you see in the next 10 years, Indian steel industry will focus on reducing the emission intensity. But the way we are growing, whether the absolute emission will reduce in last 10 years, that may not happen. But what's going to happen? We see some promise in terms of how we can eliminate the iron making process with less carbon intensive process, and green hydrogen is one of the favorite in steel industry, where we are looking at very keenly that when it will be cost effective, at the same time available at a scale so that we can use. For example, you might be knowing that in India, we have an Indian Hydrogen Association which we formed many years before, where we are promoting how we can use more and more green hydrogen in the reduction process so that we can make steel industry more clean. But carbon capture is another technology which we, from the steel industry perspective, will be keenly watching for, because ultimately we will be left with what you call the carbon intensive technology, where the investment will get locked up. And therefore, to abate it, the carbon capture and storage has to play an important role. So in both green hydrogen and carbon capture and storage, how we can make them cost effective. And that is a question of time and research. And that also a question of policy decisions. I strongly believe, being also in the steel industry, when you have a higher cost of carbon and the technology maturity increases, at one point, I believe it should be well before 2050, this technology will be commercially viable, feasible, and it will improve at scale, and it will be applicable in the steel industry. But question is, should we wait for that and we do nothing in the period? And that is where I believe steel industry is taking a lot of initiative, including the ministry. If you all be aware, the Ministry of Steel, I think the only ministry of steel in the world which we have a ministry, they have already constituted 13 task force to find different avenues, right from defining the taxonomy for the green steel. By the way, there is no unified definition of green steel in the world. And I think that is where India will possibly take a lead to define what green steel is. And the technology pathways, including skilling. So, holistically, Government of India is working with all the stakeholders to decarbonize this sector. So that work is going ahead, and that I believe will help, including creating a demand for green steel. But the other aspect from the private industry player, although we are putting up more and more so-called blast furnace technologies to use our own resources effectively and increase our efficiency, we are also looking at technologies where we can we work on the circularity of carbon. Instead of emitting it, because in iron making fundamentally, you have a reduction process where you take out the oxygen with addition of carbon. So can I use those carbon on a circular basis? So that's also we are working. So I believe there are interesting time ahead. Steel is a fundamental material and essential for climate change mitigation. Indian economic growth is associated with steel sector growth. We need to decarbonize the steel sector. So these are the facts we know. Technology is going to prove a very important key role in decarbonizing. But the most important lever right now, I think two levers, we talked about finance here, so I should touch upon that. So on the finances, when we come to the large player like us, I don't think availability of finance is a challenge. Challenge is the viability gap funding. Because if I use hydrogen, it is becoming 3 times costly than using the carbon. So where that initial inertia, force, that viability gap funding need to come to make this happen, so that the technological innovations and finance flow can come to a point where it will be self-sustaining. So that's our take, and in JSW we are committed, and we are looking at all technology. We are operating a carbon capture storage plant, and we are looking at how we can scale up. We are looking at hydrogen. We are also looking at the new disruptive technology which we have not thought of. For example, if we need to decarbonize, I believe everything needs to be electrified, and that electrification should be supported with renewable energy. That is the easiest way to decarbonize any sector. So a couple of things where we know there are startup companies, we are looking at how we can do the electrolysis of iron ores with green energy and make this as a carbon free. So there also we are looking at and looking forward to support those kind of startups to come and change the way we live in the world, in a carbon intensive world. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think, this perspective coming from the end use sector and a sector like steel, which India definitely is a very major player in terms of the manufacturing base that is already in place, but also the ambition of ramping it up. Let me now move to Mr. Sundarajan, who's the managing director and the country head for India Equinor. And Equinor, we know, is a very large player in the offshore wind market. And the LCOE in the European markets pretty much cost competitive. How do you really see this moving in the Asian markets and India in particular? And what's your sense of how soon would the offshore wind become a technology that also becomes a very strong pillar in the energy transition of emerging economies like India, Indonesia, and others?
Yeah. Thanks for the question. I think I want to rewind maybe 10 or 11 years, right? I was actually in Oslo last week, and we were having a management team meeting. And one of the questions that was asked to the audience was, when did we take a decision gate A on the floating wind farm in Hywind, Scotland, basically? And all of us got it wrong. The answer was 2009. So what I'm really trying to say is it's an evolution of many years of working very closely together with the supply chain, with the EPC contractors, together with the policy makers, when we actually got the costs to the levels that exist today. In fact, I cheated a little bit and I asked the same question to Dr. Mathur this morning. And he also made a very interesting point. I think the generation one of the offshore wind technology is heavily designed towards the conditions that prevail in the European seas, right? Those conditions don't necessarily exist in the seas in Asia. So I think there's a slight bit of tweak and transformation of the technology in itself that is needed. But what will actually prime the developers to do that? That's policy again, an opportunity. And unfortunately, there is the same set of players when it comes to developers, when it comes to technology developers, and when it also comes to installers. And the same set of capital is essentially competing globally. So in order for the scales to actually come down to where the European scales are today in an Asian landscape, I really commend the way, MNRE in particular is looking at it, is awarding large blocks, which will actually prod investment, which will also prod local supply chain development. And really the only way to do it is also in symphony. I always say this, putting an offshore wind project together is actually like an orchestra, where there are hundreds and thousands of people and players that need to work together in symphony. So the key is have a target, have a time-bound target, and everybody needs to work together. And that's the only way the scales will come down, including offshore wind turbine manufacturing, offshore services companies, and most importantly, the egress, taking the power from offshore to land. That in itself can be a challenge in many geographies, as we have witnessed. So yeah, that's really the recipe.
No, thank you so much. Because, I think there are many people in India who have been looking at the offshore wind and it taking off at scales for some time now. So I hope with the initiatives that are now being taken by the ministry will actually unfold this whole segment to come into prominence as we move forward. Let me turn to you, Mr. Gupta, who's the CFO of Reliance New Energies Limited. And coming from the finance sector, and being a part of a private sector entity that's very bullish on both green hydrogen and other emerging technologies in the space of storage and others, I want to turn to you to ask you what are really the challenges you see in terms of lowering the cost of capital for these new emerging technologies. I mean, we did see in the morning the discussion that came from Mrs. Abha Shukla and also from Secretary MNRE and Secretary Par, that the cost of capital, even in India, for some of the mature technologies is still high compared to the other developed countries. So what are the challenges you really see?
Yeah. So thank you once again. So having worked in this power sector now for more than 20 years, and if I just look at the context of funding for such projects, and you look at the spectrum of TRL, technology readiness level, projects that are low on TRL, let's say TRL 1 to 4, there's a lot of funding available. There are academia funding, there are government grants, and then a lot of accelerator funds. So there's funding available for those TRL projects. On the other end of the spectrum, for projects that are now proven, even solar in India is now proven, or onshore wind is proven. There are defined debt equity norms. You started with 70-30, today mostly people do 80-20. So there again, there is access to funding. It's become part of priority sector in India. Green bonds are the government is promoting and encouraging companies to do those. It is in the middle where we have the issue. The problem of funding is in the middle, TRL 5 to 8 probably. And there then what is really the issue? If you really look into it, what's the issue of why is it difficult to fund those projects? The issue there is that as the technology is developing, and it is rapidly developing, there is a steep fall that happens in the capex. So a project set up in 23, if it is going to live a life of 15 years, and it has to compete with the project that will come up in 25 at half the capex, so that's the challenge. Uh, so, so the solution, therefore, is really, as I see it, in two areas. One is securing offtake, which in the Irena presentation also it was covered. So securing offtake, now there are ways to do it. One is, of course, the simplest is to say that there's a long-term, sort of a long-term power purchase agreement. What we discussed, that 18 rupee tariff for 25 years. And that was true, meaning in 2007, 8, and today, 15 years down the line, power prices have fallen substantially. So that is one route to take. But then customers today don't want to lock into those kind of tenures. Today everybody wants short-term contracts. So then what do you do? So maybe an option to have a tariff which is declining, meaning you have a higher tariff in the initial 3 or 4 years, where it has to be tied up with some, it has to be based on some sort of a sharing mechanism. Either you call it FIT or, it's taken by some nominated agency which then supplies to customers. And after that 3 or 4 year period, it is left open to market forces to compete with the next generation of technology, which will come at a much lower capex. So that is the second possibility. The third, of course, is what the government of India is anyway doing, which is on the lines of RPO, which is for solar and wind. They intend to do it for green hydrogen, and that is another way to secure demand. So this is one aspect I think needs to be cracked if we have to have cheaper funding. The second part on funding, financing avenues. Of course, incentive schemes like the government of India has launched successfully, the PLI scheme. But then what we also see today in India is that a lot of states, lot of these states are also very actively offering incentives. And they sometimes are much more than what government of India offers. So there is some merit in probably for them to work together, the center and the state, and design packages which will develop not just that particular industry, but the entire ecosystem. Because you need an ecosystem for even solar manufacturing, or tomorrow for green hydrogen, or for battery. So if there is synergy in those incentives, it can give more bang for the same buck. So that is one. The second is, of course, viability gap funding, because higher capex means you reduce capex through government funding in the initial years. And of course, the funding from financial institutions, international IFC, ADB, and the multilateral financial institutions which have access to low-cost funding. Primarily, these are the two. Just one last point was that we are also seeing in the last year or last 2 years, a lot of the developed world, especially in the US and in Europe, schemes that are being heavily funded by the government, incentive schemes, and those are to promote the green ecosystem in those countries. So while they do that, but I think as a part of one of the objectives of this forum, it is also important to see how it does not become a hindrance to funding the needs of the developing world, so that all move together and it is inclusive. So that's from my side. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think, this whole concept of supporting not just deployment of technology, but also developing an ecosystem is absolutely critical. And, the ecosystem, of course, can get developed from a demand side pull, which comes from things like the RPO, or a supply side, like we see in the IRA. But let me turn to Mr. Christensen, who brings with him a lot of international experience. He's the climate ambassador for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of Climate, Energy and Utilities. But I think at Irena, we know him as a champion for the Global Offshore Wind Alliance. So let me ask you this, Mr. Christensen, that you've seen how policies are unfolding across the world, and but what are the early success stories that you're seeing especially in the policy frameworks that are supportive of emerging technologies, and which are good examples, good best practices for other countries to take forward.
Thank you, Gauri, and thank you for having me here. I had hoped to be speaking after RJ, but happy to go first. Just let me take one step back and say that for every country on the planet, I think the combination of energy security and affordable energy are sort of two priorities that almost go before anything else, and hence when you look at the energy mix that you try to achieve as a country, you want to do that going forward while maintaining the security of your supply. And if I look at my own country, we had an extreme shock in terms of energy supply 50 years ago during a former energy crisis, where we suddenly were left without any energy sources because we were dependent on the import of fossil energies. And we embarked on at that time, everything all at once strategy, which was both developing the extraction of oil and gas in the North Sea, developing very strict regulation on energy efficiency, but then also investing in the development of, at that time, non-existing renewable energy technologies with the main focus on wind. And the wind part then developed into the offshore wind, and the first offshore wind farm in the world that was set up in Danish waters in 1991. But that trajectory then came with government investments, with subsidies, and the development of the industry, but also the engineering skills of how to do it. So working with our universities and academia in developing the knowledge base, and with the institutional investors in Denmark in terms of the financing. So also in a public-private collaboration of developing the skills, the technologies, the innovation, and the cost structure. And I think sort of maturing that fast forward has led us to a situation where 25 years ago, 90% of our energy was from coal, to today, where 60 to 70% is from wind and some solar and biomass. But we expect to close our last coal-fired power plant in 5 years, and we were the largest oil and gas producer in the European Union after Brexit, but have now also decided to actually end our oil and gas production by 2050, the latest, and we've no longer have government licensing grounds for oil and gas because the offshore wind is developing so fast now at such low price that where we were subsidizing it for a long time, it is so mature now that we actually have companies paying us to get the rights to develop the offshore wind grounds. The highest cost of offshore wind now is actually the transmission lines and the grid. It's not the building of the towers themselves. And I think as India matures its experience, you will also see that the first gigawatt of offshore wind will be expensive and will have to come with some kind of government support. But as you build the next gigawatts, your industry fast learns, you will develop the infrastructure, the grid, and the prices will come down extremely fast. And then offshore wind is a way to go to industrial scale energy production quite fast at such a size. I mean, the largest turbines now are 15 to 16 megawatt a piece. And that allows you to actually build very large scale, very fast. Our own national plan is to quintuple our offshore wind by 2030 to 2035, including starting to build artificial islands in the North Sea with 10 gigawatt of offshore wind around each island, and the capacity to produce the green hydrogen at sea and load it directly onto ships, and with one transmission line from a 10 gigawatt farm. That also brings down the cost. So I think we keep on innovating and maturing both the technology, the turbines, the grid, and the thinking around it in order to stay afloat, and with the close partnership with the institutional investors and the private sector. And I see India maturing very fast in that direction, and at least in our knowledge, other Asian countries are also thinking of how to build those clusters where you can where you can innovate, mature, and have the skills base at the same time.
No, absolutely. And I think, there's a lot that the world can learn from the way Denmark has gone ahead. And I think this new concept of developing these artificial islands that aggregates the supply so that there's, the expenditure on the transmission gets reduced to some extent. I think that's clearly a very strong emerging trend in terms of how the offshore wind will grow in the world.
If I may, Gauri, just one more comment that we have a target of emissions reduction of 70% by 2030. And in order to get there, we are again putting everything all at once policy in place, because we are also doing carbon capture and storage. We have a first test site where we are putting CO2 into the ground in the North Sea, and we're also investing in direct air capture, because we think we have to work on all technologies at the same time. Some will be faster in maturing. They all need some kind of government investment and subsidy upfront, but in order for us to get to net zero well, our target is now 2045, we have no time to waste.
And I couldn't agree more, really. I think that's pretty much a thought that troubles a lot of us who are in the energy sector. So let me turn to Dr. Ajay Mathur, who's the Director General of the International Solar Alliance. And he was earlier also the DG at TERI. To ask you, Dr. Mathur, that, we've been talking a lot about what's happening in India, and also we heard from Mr. Christensen about Denmark and how it's become a really large market for offshore wind. But you have amongst your members a lot of countries that are very small markets. And, when you're looking at the discussions where you are playing a very important part is on local supply chains, how do you really see this growing? Because are there some kind of aggregations that are happening around regional, configurations coming together to create that kind of a larger demand, or there are some other trends that you would like to get your insights out for us?
Thank you very much. One of the things that we are seeing is that the price of developing solar panels is declining. That's number one. But the vast amount of solar panels are coming out of one country. I think 86% of panels come out of China. And last year, and continuing now, there is a supply constraint in terms of logistics. So there were, for example, 2 months worth of solar panels which were on the ports in Shanghai last month, and there was an equal number of days when there was no solar panels available in West Africa, for example. As we are looking to huge increases, we are looking to 3 to 10 times, I think the Irena numbers are, for increases in solar panel demand by 2030. This means a huge amount of new capacity needs to be developed. This obviously cannot be held to be dependent on the supply chains. This means a large amount of geographical diversification is needed. Now, as you very rightly said, there is a sort of a diversification and a sort of aggregation that is happening. Diversification, because solar panels you can make almost anywhere. If there is a demand, if there is a port where you can import cells, which are then put together in the form of panels, that makes great sense. It can happen anywhere. However, making cells is a challenge. It needs a huge infrastructure. The price of cells is here. If you make a new plant, the price is somewhere here, much more. Therefore, you need incentives. In India, we are providing the incentives on the after the sales based on efficiency, the production-linked incentive program. In the US, you're providing it through the Inflation Reduction Act, which is on the supply side. But the point of both of them is that there is a public support for the creation of new manufacturing capacity. This implies we need to look at various countries and see where these make greatest sense in terms of the macroeconomics of the country, so that local hubs can be formed around which the demand is aggregated. This leads to a separate question, which is what happens when you are looking on the one hand at manufacturing, on the other hand at technology development, and the countries which are at different levels of demand. So, for example, countries where demand is just picking up, we need what we just talked of in the form of viability gap funding. You need public sector money in order to have the confidence of the private sector that they can go ahead. As this develops, then the next question is, okay, you use something like the RPO, the Renewables Portfolio Obligation in India, which gives a degree of confidence to a person who's putting in his or her own equity that there will be a purchase, you will be paid. This leads to the third steps where, we talked a great deal about the fact that even though there is a large amount of money coming into India, it's expensive money. Why? The main reason is that the risk associated with repayments is relatively high. And therefore, all these would help if that loans, for example, provided by the ADBs, provided by the World Banks, if they can be, to whatever extent, converted to guarantees. Because what guarantees does is it greatly leverages private sector investment. A lot more private sector investment occurs because there is this guarantee behind, and it enhances the credit enhancement that we were talking about. All of these are the blended finance that Mr. Roche talked about. But the nature of the public sector financing changes as you go along the progress in technology development. The long and the short of it is, while blended finance is clearly the answer, how you structure it depends on what the needs are, what the internal resources are. And I know that this is a long question, but I hope that this leads to a stimulation of thinking on what are the best measures in every geography. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think, this is pretty much what the next panel will also address. But I think we have time for a couple of questions from the audience. I think you've heard from professors in IIT, you've heard from the private sector, and also panelists with very significant international experience. So if there are a couple of questions that you'd like the panelists to take. Okay, I do see a hand there.
Thank you. The panel was really insightful. My question is primarily centered around the off-taker risks that were mentioned during the discussion. So maybe in the case of something like hydrogen or its derivatives, even green steel was mentioned, the producer could be in a different nation and the product could end up in another nation. So how does financing now address the risk where your off-taker is in a different geography, whereas your producer is in a different geography? So what kind of mechanism sort of could be developed here which ensures that you have cross-border trade of goods, and then the financing might be required only on one end? Yeah. Thank you for that.
Any of our panelists would like to take this on?
Very, very quickly, at the end of the day, the investor is looking at the contracts you have with the off-takers. If you have, for example, a contract with somebody across the border, then there are two risks. One is obviously the payment guarantee, and the other is the transportation risk. So in the case of green hydrogen, we are trying to reduce the transportation risk by transporting ammonia or urea or some derivative based on green hydrogen. The second option could also be that you are only exporting a part of your production. And a part of the production is what you're providing to local consumers of hydrogen in the refinery sector, in the fertilizer sector, hopefully in the steel sector tomorrow. It is this diversification of demand which would lead to an acceptable risk profile on which investors would be willing to invest.
May I just, sorry, go ahead. Yeah, just a follow-up comment maybe, and I'm not answering your questions by any means. It's a brilliant question, and it also not just goes to the financing sector, but also the policy-making sector. Because one of the biggest questions that the American taxpayer is asking today is, why should we be producing blue or green ammonia and hydrogen to decarbonize targets of South Korea and Japan, where the first generation incentives are for offtake, right? And that kind of goes back to the coordinated discussion on a global level around the source and the sink of carbon and carbon credits and all those things come into play. So there are new mechanisms that are being discussed and that need to come into play, but they all need to be working together. Working in isolation is not going to help. Thomas?
Well, just to say that we are right now in the middle of the global transition of supply, demand, governments, private sector. We are all in this together, but we're also at various stages of moving along that curve, and hence it is a bit messy at this stage. And one of the questions that is being discussed in the next room amongst G20 energy principles is the question whether we need to have a process of standardization of green hydrogen. What is green hydrogen actually? And at least the Danish private sector, and I'm sure the same is for the Indian, are all asking us, so what is the global standard? How do we actually measure it? And if I take the industry that is biggest in my country in this question, it's the shipping industry, where some of the Danish shippers are amongst the largest in the world and are already moving ahead in procuring ships able to sail on green ammonia or green methanol. But in the absence of a global standard, they have to define the standard themselves. Their investors, their customers are saying, we will pay a premium for you transporting our good from Asia to your markets in Europe and the US. But there is no standard on what a green shipment looks like. So they have to set that themselves and procure the fuel source according to a standard that they define. And it's all a bit shaky and murky, but that is the conditions under which they have to operate. So I think as those investments grow, the demand on policymakers for actually setting some global standards and having some global common rules in this space will get bigger.
No, I think I've just got an indication that we now need to move to the next panel. But, you know, I think, Thomas, just picking up from your point of the fact that it is messy, but then which transition is not? So I think we all need to be shaken out of our comfort zone to be able to move and to be able to think out of the box, to look at policies that we hadn't really thought of, to look at problems that come up with people questioning which way we are going and how soon or how fast we can get there. So fine, I think we're in that kind of a flux, but that's what will actually get us all moving to a much more a steadier pace of deploying more renewables and getting into the energy transition with new energy, green energy of the future that we all want to see. So thank you so much, and thank you so much for being here, and thank you so much for the audience for listening to this very interesting panel. Thank you.
Thank you. May I now request Ms. Gauri Singh to kindly felicitate our panelists by presenting a memento as a token of our appreciation. I now request the Irena team to kindly present a memento to Ms. Gauri Singh. A huge round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. We now end with the first panel discussion. Thank you. We now move on to the second panel discussion on the topic, the role of international financial institutions and multilateral development banks in mobilizing investments. This session will highlight the role played by the public sector as a catalyzer in setting the right ecosystem to reduce the cost of capital and attract private investment for the adoption of emerging energy technologies. May I request the panelists for the second session to please come up on the dais. Ms. Harsha Bangari, Mr. Pradeep Kumar Das, Mr. Soumik Lal, Mr. Pradeep Tharakan, Mr. K. Mukundan, and Mr. Ravinder Singh Dhillon. This session will be moderated by Mr. Dan Dorner, Head of the Strategic Initiatives Office at International Energy Agency. May I request the panelists to please come up on the dais? This would be the but I'll invite you.
Good afternoon.
I now invite Mr. Dan Dorner for his brief presentation, followed by the panel discussion. Over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. If we could get my slides up on the screen, that would be great. Perfect. So look, welcome everyone to this second panel as part of this overall event on low-cost finance for new and emerging energy technologies. So before moving into discussions with our distinguished panel, let me start with a few framing remarks. So over the last year or so, there have been several strong signs that the clean energy economy is emerging much faster than many people thought possible. Global renewable power capacity additions surged by almost 1/4 in 2022, and this was driven by a 40% increase in solar PV, which has actually been fast enough to align with the rate envisaged in the IEA's pathway to net zero emissions by 2050, so encouraging news. Heat pumps have been growing very strongly and are outselling gas furnaces and boilers in the United States and in parts of Europe. And continued growth at this rate would almost double their share of heating in buildings worldwide by 2030. Again, encouraging news. And electric car sales increased by 55% in 2022 to over 10 million units. They now account for some 15% of the global car market, up from less than 5% just 2 years ago. Again, encouraging news, but there is a caveat with this one, which is the overwhelming majority of these sales to date are concentrated in just 3 markets: China, Europe, and the United States. And again, for more encouraging news, global energy efficiency improved at twice the rate last year of the previous 2 years. All of this is very positive news and is unsurprisingly reflected in global figures for clean energy investment. And by the end of 2022, governments had allocated an additional $1.2 trillion to sustainable transitions. Now, looking forward, government actions that we can already see will help propel clean energy investment to new highs of more than $2 trillion a year by the end of this decade. Strong growth, but to move onto a pathway consistent with a 1.5-degree scenario trajectory, we need to actually see that level of clean energy investment, infrastructure investment, to be more than $4 trillion by 2030, so around double the level that we currently expect to see. And this increase in investment is required across all sectors, from the power sector to transport, investments in efficiency, and beyond. So another note to say is, even though we see the growth in this investment story, this recent growth in global clean energy investment is actually due almost entirely to growth that we see in advanced economies and in China. And meanwhile, clean energy spending actually in many other emerging and developing economies remains relatively flat. And even for many of those countries, at a level that we also saw way back in 2015. And this should be a wake-up call and an alarm bell for all of us. Many of these countries find themselves in a trap with underdeveloped financial markets deterring investment and a lack of projects preventing the establishment of reliable pricing benchmarks. And in addition to needing to ramp up the scale of investment, IEA analysis has shown that the cost of capital for a utility-scale solar PV plant in 2021 was anywhere between 2 and 3 times higher in key emerging economies than it was in advanced economies. And our cost of capital observatory shows that despite having 2/3 of the global population, emerging and developing economies, excluding China, I should say, account for less than 1/5